The badge around my neck felt heavier than usual that morning, not because of its weight. It was the same laminated card I'd clipped on every day for the past 4 years, but because of what I saw the moment I stepped through my own front door. My sister was standing in the middle of my living room, holding a folder I recognized immediately. Cream-colored, sealed with a red tab, stamped with the kind of markings that made my stomach drop the second I saw them in her hands. She hadn't heard me come in. She was flipping through the pages slowly, the way someone does when they think they have all the time in the world. I stood in the doorway for a moment, my keys still in my hand, and I didn't say a single word. I just watched. And I made a note of everything I was seeing, the way I'd been trained to do. My name is Diana. I'm 31 years old. I work as a compliance officer for a federal contractor, a firm that processes grants and disbursements for government agencies across 3 states. Part of my job means I sometimes bring documentation home for secure review. Sensitive documentation, the kind that comes with specific handling requirements, chain of custody rules, and federal oversight. The folder my sister was holding? It contained audit authorization records and signed disbursement approvals tied to a $380,000 government grant cycle. Those documents were not hers to touch. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without understanding my sister first. My sister's name is Carla. She's 26, and for most of our lives, she and I operated on completely different frequencies. I was the one who stayed quiet at dinner, finished homework before it was due, put money away instead of spending it. Carla was the one who borrowed things without asking, returned them without mentioning the damage, and smiled wide enough that most people forgave her before they even realized they were upset. She was charming. She was funny. She was the daughter my parents pointed to when their friends asked how the kids were doing. I was the daughter they mentioned when someone asked about the reliable one. That was fine. I made peace with that a long time ago. What I never made peace with was the way Carla treated my home. I bought my condo 3 years ago, saved for it carefully, went without a lot of things to afford the down payment, and the day I got the keys I told myself this was mine, not a family space. Not a place where anyone could come and go as they pleased. Mine. My mother had a spare key for emergencies. I made that clear when I gave it to her. Emergencies only. Carla knew that. She also knew that when I was at work, the condo was empty. She had used the key before. Small things at first, stopping by to borrow a charger, grabbing something she claimed I'd offered her once. I'd addressed it each time, calmly, directly, in the way I'd learned to communicate with her over years of understanding that Carla heard you better when you didn't raise your voice. She'd nod, apologize, and things would go quiet for a while. Then she'd do it again. This was different. I cleared my throat. She spun around so fast the folder snapped shut in her hands. Diana. She said my name like a greeting, like she was happy to see me. Like she hadn't just been alone in my home without my permission, reading documents she had no clearance to read. You're home early. I am. I set my keys on the table by the door and didn't move any closer. What are you doing here? Mom gave me the key. She said it casually. I needed to print something. My printer's been broken for 2 weeks, and I remembered you have that nice laser printer in the office. What is that in your hands? She looked down. Something shifted in her expression. Not guilt, exactly. More like recalibration. Like she was deciding what version of the story worked best for her. This? She held it up slightly. It was just sitting on your desk. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for paper, and this was right there. That was in my desk drawer. The drawer was open. It was not open. I kept my voice level. That drawer has a latch. It doesn't open on its own. She set the folder down on the coffee table in front of her, and I had to work very hard not to cross the room and grab it. I needed to stay calm. I needed to think before I reacted. I didn't read it, she said. I just picked it up to move it. It was in a closed drawer, Carla. Diana, relax. It's just paperwork. She smiled, that practiced, patient smile she used when she thought I was being difficult. You work too hard. You bring your job stress home and you act like everything in this apartment is classified. Some of it is, I thought, but I didn't say that yet. You need to leave, I said instead, and you need to leave that folder exactly where it is." Her smile faded a little. Not completely. Carla's smile never dropped all the way, it just thinned. "I came here to use your printer. Mom said you wouldn't mind. Mom doesn't speak for my home. You should have asked me. You were at work. How was I supposed to ask you? By calling me, by texting me, by waiting until I was available." I walked to the desk in the corner of the room and opened the top right drawer. The folder should have been there, tucked in the back beneath the manila envelope. Instead, it was on my coffee table, pages slightly askew. She hadn't just picked it up to move it. "I need you to go," I said again. "I'll call you tonight." She left, not without sighing loudly and gathering her bag with the particular kind of energy that communicated she felt wrongly accused. She did not apologize. She did say at the door, "I don't know why you're making this into such a big deal." I waited until I heard the elevator down the hall before I picked up the folder and checked every page. Everything was there. That was the first thing I confirmed. Nothing removed, nothing visibly copied. Though I couldn't rule out photographs taken on a phone, the pages were out of order. She had gone through them. How carefully, I didn't know. I sat down and stayed very still for a long time. Then I made a phone call. Not to Carla. Not to my mother. I called my direct supervisor, explained what had come home with me that week and what had just happened, and I asked for guidance. That conversation lasted 40 minutes. By the end of it, we had agreed on next steps, and I had documented the incident in writing. I did not tell my mother what had happened, not that night. I should tell you something about my mother, because she is important to this story. My mother is a woman who loves both her daughters genuinely and completely, which sounds like a simple thing until you understand what she does with that love when the two of them are in conflict. She balances. She weighs. She considers each side with a kind of careful diplomacy that would be admirable in a neutral third party, but becomes a problem when one side has done something that isn't a matter of perspective. She was not a bad mother. She just had a deep, persistent belief that most situations involving her children were fixable with enough patience and enough conversation. She was also the one who had given Carla the key. I called her 2 days later after I'd had time to settle and think. "She was using your printer," my mother said after I explained the situation. "You know how her printer has been broken. She mentioned it at Sunday dinner last week." "Mom, she wasn't trying to steal anything, Diana. I'm not saying she stole anything. I'm saying she went through a closed drawer in my desk and handled documents she was not supposed to handle. I need you to understand that this isn't just about manners." A pause. "What kind of documents?" "I can't go into detail. That's the point. They're work documents. Federal work. There are rules about who can have access to them, and Carla does not have access." My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said you told her she could stop by whenever she needed to use the printer. I hadn't said that. I had said once, many months ago, that if she ever needed to print something she could ask me. Ask me. Not let herself in while I was at work. "I'll talk to her," my mother said. "I need you to take the key back." Another pause. "Longer this time. Diana, that feels like an overreaction." I'd expected that. I let it sit between us for a moment before I responded. "The key was for emergencies," I said. "This wasn't an emergency. If it wasn't for the fact that I left work early, I wouldn't have even known she was there. What would have happened then? She would have been alone in my apartment with access to things she had no business accessing, and I would never have known. She's your sister. She's not some stranger off the street. I know who she is. That's not what we're discussing." My mother said she'd think about it. She did not take the key back. Carla called me 3 days later. I answered because I'm not someone who avoids conversations, even ones I don't want to have. "I talked to Mom," she said. "She told me you're upset." I explained to Mom why what happened was a serious problem. It was a folder, Diana, a boring work folder. "I wasn't interested in your documents, I promise you. That's not really what matters. Then what matters? That you were alone in my apartment, that you went through my desk, and that you handled something you were not authorized to handle, regardless of your intentions." She exhaled. that slow, deliberate exhale that meant she was choosing patience with me. You know what your problem is? You've been in that job so long, you treat your entire life like an audit. I let that sit for a second. I'd like to talk about the key, I said. She was quiet. I want Mom to take it back, or I want it returned to me directly. What happened last week wasn't an emergency. I needed to print something. Then you text me. You ask. You do not let yourself into my home while I'm not there. There was a longer silence, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. Not to anger exactly, but to something I recognized. The version of Carla that appeared when she felt genuinely cornered. Fine, she said. I'll give it back to Mom. Are you happy? I'll be satisfied, I said. She returned the key to my mother. I know because my mother texted to tell me, with a single added sentence, I hope this helps you both move forward. I read that text twice, then put my phone face down on my desk and went back to work. For a while, things were quiet. 6 weeks, maybe 7, long enough that I stopped thinking about it every day. Long enough that I went to Sunday dinner twice and sat across from Carla and had normal conversations about nothing important, and it almost felt like we'd settled back into whatever the usual version of us was. Then my firm got assigned to a new grant cycle. I don't need to go into the technical details, but the short version is this. My company had been selected to manage the disbursement review process for a significant federal infrastructure allocation, larger than anything I'd worked on before. As the lead compliance officer on the account, I was responsible for verifying documentation at several stages of the process. Some of those documents came through my home workstation, securely transferred, stored in an encrypted drive, with physical backup copies that I kept locked in the fireproof case I'd bought specifically for this kind of work. The case sat in the closet of my home office. It had a combination lock. Carla did not know the combination. What she did know, because I'd mentioned it casually at dinner once before I understood how much she was paying attention, was that I was working on something big. That it was the kind of project that could define the next stage of my career. That there was, in my words, a lot riding on it. I think about that dinner often now. How ordinary it felt. How I poured a second glass of wine and told my family something I was proud of. Something real. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because sometimes you just want the people who have known you your whole life to understand that you are doing something that matters. I didn't argue, I just said, good to Natmart to mean away. I found out what she had done on a Thursday evening in late autumn. I came home to find my closet open. The case was on the floor. The combination lock was intact. She hadn't broken it. But the case itself had been pried at the seams enough to pull the lid open without knowing the code. It's something I would not have thought possible if I hadn't seen the damage myself. She hadn't taken everything. I want to be precise about that. She had taken one specific folder, the one containing countersigned authorization forms for the largest disbursement tranche in the grant cycle, documents with my supervisor's signature, the agency contact signature, and my own. I stood in my closet for I don't know how long. Then I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, and before I could say anything, I heard voices in the background, the familiar sound of her kitchen, dishes, the low murmur of a television, and then Carla's voice, clearly saying something that made my mother laugh. Diana? My mother sounded warm, unhurried. We're just finishing dinner. Can I call you in? Is Carla there? A pause. Yes, why? I need you to ask her something. My mother did not ask her. My mother put me on speaker, and suddenly I was talking to the room. Diana. Carla's voice was bright. What's up? I need you to tell me where the folder is. Silence. Then, what folder? You know what folder, Carla. I genuinely don't know what you're talking about. I sat down on the floor of my closet, my back against the wall. I came home to find my storage case pried open. The only thing missing is a document folder. You are the only person who knew that case was there, and you're the only person who had a key to this apartment, unless Mom made another copy. I gave the key back. Did you make a copy first? No answer. Carla. My voice came out very quiet. Those documents don't belong to me. They're federal grant records. They have security requirements attached to them. If you have them, you need to return them tonight. I don't have your folders, Diana. Her voice had shifted again. Not the cornered register from before, but something flatter, deliberate. And I think it's a little insulting that you'd call here and accuse me of something like that in front of Mom. My mother, to her credit, was no longer making sounds. "Come to my apartment," I said. "Right now. If you don't have the folder, you have nothing to be uncomfortable about. If you do, bring it back, and we can figure out a way through this." A long pause, then my mother's voice, low. "Carla, do you know anything about this?" "No." Clear. Immediate. "I'm coming over," I said, and I hung up. I did not go to my mother's house that night. I sat in my car outside for 4 minutes, and then I made a different decision. I drove home, and I called my supervisor. I am not going to pretend that call was easy to make. I had spent 4 years building a reputation at that firm for being thorough, careful, and reliable. Calling my supervisor to tell her that federal documentation had been removed from my home, possibly by a family member who had made a copy of a key she was supposed to return, was not a call I wanted to make. It was a call I needed to make. My supervisor's name is Renata, and she has a way of being calm in situations that makes you realize how much you needed someone to be calm. She did not express frustration. She asked me 3 precise questions. She told me what she was going to do next. By the following morning, the situation had been escalated to the appropriate oversight office. By Friday afternoon, 2 investigators had been assigned. They moved quickly, and I think this is the part people don't fully understand when they imagine what this kind of investigation looks like. It is not slow. It is not uncertain. When documentation with federal handling requirements goes missing, the process that follows has been designed for exactly this kind of situation, and it runs. I don't know exactly what happened in the 48 hours between my call to Renata and the moment investigators arrived at my mother's door. I know what I was told afterward. I know what was documented in the reports I later had access to. And I know what my mother told me, crying, the night she called me after it was over. Carla had the folder. It was in her car, which tells me she had intended to go somewhere with it. Where and why? That is the part that took longer to understand. It came out during the investigation that Carla had been talking to someone, a man she'd met through a mutual contact who, it turned out, was connected to a firm that had previously bid on the same grant contract and lost. He had told her, she said, that the documents were worth something, not in cash exactly, not in the direct sense, but that certain authorization records, if they could be shown to contain procedural irregularities, could be used to challenge the grant award. He had told her this was normal, that it happened all the time, that she wouldn't be stealing anything, just borrowing paperwork for a few days. She had believed him. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. I've thought about it many times since then, and I still don't have a settled answer. Carla is not stupid. She is not malicious in the way you'd imagine a truly malicious person to be. She is someone who wanted something, money, attention, the feeling of being the one who came through for once, and she found someone who told her a story that made the wrong thing sound reasonable. That is a kind of vulnerability I understand even when I can't excuse it. The documents were recovered entirely. Nothing had been copied, shared, or used. The grant cycle proceeded without disruption. My supervisor told me, with genuine warmth, that I had done exactly the right thing at every step. Carla was charged with 2 federal offenses: unauthorized access to controlled documentation and conspiracy related to interfering with a federal contracting process. My parents hired a lawyer. The case moved through the system over the following 8 months. I was not a central witness in the way you'd imagine. The facts were not in dispute, and the investigative record was thorough enough that the proceeding was less dramatic than I'd expected. I gave a deposition. I answered questions. I was honest about everything, including the prior incident with the desk drawer, including the key, including what I had and had not known. Her attorney argued for leniency on the basis of her age, her lack of prior record, and her cooperation with investigators once she understood the severity of what had happened. The argument had some merit. She had, to her credit, told the truth when it mattered. She had named the man who'd approached her, and that cooperation had led to a separate proceeding against him. She was sentenced to 2 years probation, a substantial fine, and a permanent bar from certain types of federal contracting employment. My mother cried at the sentencing. She held my father's hand on one side and an empty seat on the other, because I had not been able to bring myself to sit beside her that day. I sat 3 rows back, alone, and I watched the proceedings with the same stillness I had been practicing for months. The courtroom had tall windows, and the light that afternoon was flat and gray, the kind that makes everything look like it's waiting. When it was over, I stepped outside and stood on the courthouse steps for a while. The city moved around me the way it always does, without any particular awareness that something had just finished. A cab honked. Somebody walked by on the phone, laughing. My mother found me there. She had been crying and her eyes showed it, and she looked at me the way she'd been looking at me for months, like she was still trying to find the version of this story in which no one was wrong. "I should have taken the key back," she said. It was the first time she'd said it plainly, without a qualifier attached. "Yes," I said. She nodded. She didn't say anything else for a while. Then she reached over and put her hand on my arm, briefly, and I let her. "Are you okay?" she asked. I thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. "I'm getting there," I said. That was true. It was not complete, but it was true. The firm replaced the fireproof case with a proper office safe, which they had installed and registered. Renata had advocated for me throughout the review process and had made clear in writing that I had handled a serious situation with exactly the judgment expected of someone in my position. My annual review came 6 weeks after the sentencing, and it was the best one I'd had since joining the firm. I did not celebrate. I went home, I made dinner, I sat by the window in the quiet and thought about things for a while. Carla and I have not spoken since the sentencing. I don't know yet whether that is permanent. There is a version of the future in which we are something again. Not close, not easy, but something. I can hold that possibility without rushing toward it. What I know now, clearly and without confusion, is that you can love someone and still tell the truth about what they did. You can want the best for a person and still refuse to protect them from consequences that are theirs to bear. And you can stand in the flat gray light of a courthouse and feel grief and relief and exhaustion all at once and understand that none of those things cancel the others out. My badge still hangs around my neck. Same clip, same laminated card, same small weight against my chest. It feels right now, just the right amount of weight. Before I go, tell me where you're watching from. I read every single comment and I want to know where the story lands with you.